First, we have the State Board of Education staff update. Thank you, Bob.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just have one update, and that's on the public hearings for the consistently failing schools. In Evansville, there are 2 schools. This was a collaborative endeavor with Teresa Brown. July 17th in Evansville, August 11th in Gary. There are 2 schools that are at high intervention level, and I would encourage board members to attend those hearings if it's at all possible. Teresa Brown and I will both be there, and I'm certain that probably Maggie and Michelle also. So I just wanted to bring that as an update on schools with that are entering their 6th F year in a row.
Thank you very much. HEA 1005 update. Danielle Shockey, I believe you received her report. Are there any questions for Danielle? Hearing none. The next item is accountability panel update. Debbie Daly, accountability director at the Department of Education.
Good afternoon, board. I know it's been a long day, so I'll try to keep this very brief for you. You should have received 2 pieces of documentation. First is a memo about the accountability panel update. The second is actually accountability A through F revision work plan. Essentially, the 2 documents go together to establish what items in the A through F review are still outstanding, what items have been complete. So again, briefly going through this summary of the accountability panel, there's actually been 2 meetings since the last update. The first meeting was on June 26th. The information in the memo reflects the outcome of that meeting and the items that were discussed in that meeting. There was an additional meeting, which was actually yesterday, so July 8th, there we go. Does all blend together after a while. July 8th, so you have not received a memo with information on that. So as we work through this, I'll focus more on the information that is not contained in this memo and highlight any questions or address any questions you may have for this memo. And so again, on the June 26th meeting, we did provide the panel with assessment updates. Some of those updates include education roundtable information, provided them information on what type of assessments were recommended, as well as timing and transition to the new assessments. In addition, the panel worked on college and career readiness indicators as well as improvement. We had guest speakers from Commission for Higher Ed as well as from DWD to speak to the panel about adding additional indicators as well as the improvement metric that was previously recommended. On outcome of those 2 discussions for college and career readiness indicators, there were no final decisions made on June 26th to amend or append the list of the current college and career readiness indicators. There was, however, a decision after careful review to actually remove the recommendation for the college and career readiness improvement component was within the growth domain of the framework. Additionally, we reviewed graduation improvement. We reviewed 3 potential methods. None of those methods really stood out to the accountability panel members. And we did continue those conversations yesterday. As an outcome of those conversations yesterday, it was determined that the panel would like to continue to look at a way to incorporate out-of-cohort graduates in the metric in some way. What I mean by out-of-cohort graduates is the graduation rate reflects 4-year cohort graduates. The panel would like to look at ways of incorporating those students that were not in the 4-year cohort. Perhaps they were in the 5-year cohort, 6-year cohort, 7-year cohort, etc., into this metric. Originally, the proposal was to incorporate that into a graduation improvement metric. The panel is now considering if that is really a better or more of a reflection of performance and if that metric should be moved under the performance component rather than an improvement component. We are waiting on some guidance from USED as far as restrictions on weighting for those key components in an A through F system. I think that will influence a lot of the decisions on the panel concerning that. We are also considering, should that be a 5-year graduation rate? Should that be a ratio, et cetera? So exactly what that component should be, as well as where it should be. If it can be incorporated into the performance metric, the panel felt that it should be removed then from the growth domain within the framework. The largest piece of work that remains is growth itself, categorical and trajectory growth. The original table for categorical status improvement actually had very high correlations and poor distribution. After reviewing that information, Dr. Damian Benebetter provided for us, the panel went back and the DOE provided additional categories, enhanced the categories, as well as reestablishing the subsets or the scales between each of those subcategories. Provided an additional data run and sent that off to Dr. Damian Benebetter for reevaluation. The results that Dr. Briggs was showing you today is on those second versions of the data run. Or technically, I think we might be on the 10th version of the data run at this point. There are now 3 subcategories in the did not pass status, 3 subcategories in the pass status, as well as 2 subcategories in the pass plus status. I did want to elaborate a little bit on what Dr. Briggs had to say about the different options that were available. Again, there has definitely been focus on these correlations and being able to bring down the correlations. The original data run, the correlations were actually very high. I think they were around 0.6, even higher, 0.65. After reestablishing these categorical status model, we were able to get those correlations down lower, as Dr. Briggs illustrated to you. And then we introduced the C version of the model. The C version of the model is a little different than what Dr. Briggs had actually described. Unfortunately, we didn't have an opportunity before today's meeting to go over his presentation and clarify some of those points, but I did want to elaborate that the C version is actually categorical status improvement as well as targeted growth combined. The difference in that is that the targeted growth actually does use a component of student growth percentile, thus bringing down those correlations even lower. So moving on to the July 8th meeting, panel members, Claire actually reached out to Dr. Damian Benebetter to get some additional information about growth in general and be able to provide a general recommendation for growth components in the A through F model. I do believe you were supplied with that memo as well. And for a quick brief summary of what that says, Dr. Damian Benebetter recommends the use of student growth percentiles as a measure of growth in an accountability system. Now, as we look at that recommendation, what we don't see here is how to incorporate it. There's a variety of ways to be able to incorporate student growth percentile into an accountability system. Some states use a mean or a median. Some states actually use a modified values table in which you're using the student growth percentile and establishing a point value associated. There's a variety of ways to include that. It also doesn't go into the specific component of student growth percentile analyses to be used. Again, there's a variety of ways we can use this. Colorado growth model in general is just a formula. It's up to Indiana to determine how we want to use that formula. Currently, we use that formula as a peer-based analysis. We use student growth percentiles as, again, a norm referenced analysis for use in educator effectiveness. We use 1-year projected targets, which is another data metric that comes out of those analyses for our current A through F process. We can alter that formula and use it in a multitude of ways. Other states use it as a baseline component, meaning that instead of doing these indices every year, they establish a baseline and do the calculations off of that, so it is more criterion referenced. Other states do look at catch up, keep up, move up. In other words, there's 1-year projected targets, 2 years projected targets, 3-year projected targets, move up targets. There is a multitude of data components that are actually in the overall student growth percentile analyses. So having read this recommendation, we actually did take another version or another option back to the panel yesterday, what we called option D. Option D basically is a modified values table, similar to the approach that Wisconsin is using, which we're utilizing student growth percentiles to establish points. In the version that we presented to the panel, again, it's a modified values table. We use the prior year category to establish target student growth percentiles on a baseline calculation to show if the student is on a trajectory to maintain their status, move up a status, or move down a status. Then it's simply assigning points based on that trajectory, doing a final calculation to translate those points into a final growth score. Now, I did want to elaborate that we have not received feedback from Dr. Damien Bedebenner on this yet, as it was a very late suggestion or concept that we fed to him for analysis, nor do we have some full data runs on this at this point. But again, I did want to provide this as an update of continued options that we're looking at. To Dr. Derek Briggs' point, those correlations we feel are very important, and we do continue to do analysis to work on those correlations and ensure that we're not introducing model bias in any suggestion or recommendation from the panel.
We are on track to have the rule begin its process in August and have language available to inform that rule in September. Thank you very much, Debbie. Any questions for her? Thank you. Next item is pre-K update.
Superintendent, members of the board, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to update you this afternoon. This will be quick. I'm Melanie Brizzi with the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning with FSSA. I'm going to give you a brief update on House Enrolled Act 1004 and the pre-K pilot program. So what we're going to talk about this afternoon is the county selection update. We need to choose 5 pilot counties, then program design, and state your role as the State Board of Education, and then a few next steps. So on the county selection update, in June, we spoke about this the last time I was here. We narrowed the counties to 18 finalist counties and asked each of those counties to submit a statement of county readiness to FSSA. We are in the process of reviewing those proposals. They were due back to us on June 30th. We did receive 1 proposal from each county. There's obviously a lot of collaborative effort put into the writing of those statements. There were over 100 co-respondents on the statements of county readiness. We have convened a team of evaluators representing academia, nonprofit, and business who will be reviewing those and making the 5-county selection, and we'll be announcing that in mid-July. Next update I'd like to give you is a brief program design update. One of the decisions is what sort of program can be offered with the pre-K pilot. There will be 3 options. The first is a full calendar year program serving children 250 days a year, academic option for the school year at 180 days, or the option for an intensive summer program, that summer prior to children starting kindergarten. Other program design considerations that we're at work at, the legislation requires that we utilize a kindergarten readiness assessment. We have, the ELAC has been tasked with that responsibility. They have a work group of people who were looking at about 15 to 20 different possible tools to use as this kindergarten readiness assessment. Among those included iStar KR and some other nationally validated reliable tools. And they will have a recommendation to the board in the September meeting as to which of those should be used in that longitudinal evaluation. We also have to set up a system of accountability outcomes tied to that kindergarten readiness. The ELAC is also reviewing this and a kindergarten readiness tool, and we'll have a recommendation on this in December to the board. Part of the requirements of House Enrolled Act 1004 is that programs participating in pre-K engage in parent engagement component, and so the ELAC is also assisting us with this, and we will have a framework for those programs to use to define what does that parent engagement look like. Programs must also agree to certain reporting and monitoring requirements if they want to participate as a pre-K program. They'll be required to sign a provider agreement with FSSA that includes such things as participation in the longitudinal study, family engagement, the fiscal component, and the reporting requirements. Non-public schools who wish to be a pre-K provider must be pre-K accredited. We spoke a little bit about this last session in that there are different requirements for different provider types. For the non-public schools, they must be pre-K accredited. The state board has recognized, and this is just a reminder to all of you, those 8 entities that are recognized nationally accrediting bodies, and they're listed here on the screen: the Association of Seventh-day Adventists, the American Association of Christian Schools. You guys can probably read it better than I can. My eyesight's not that great. ACSI, Christian Schools International, Independent School Association of Central States, the International Christian Accrediting Association, National Lutheran Schools Accreditation, and Advanced Ed. Next up is the State Boards of Education ongoing role. At the September 3rd meeting, the board, we will be presenting to you the ELAC's recommendations for the kindergarten readiness assessments to use in the longitudinal study. And then back in either October or November meeting to consult with you around that procurement of the researcher to conduct the longitudinal study. Lastly, just a few next steps. In mid-July, we'll be announcing the 5 pilot counties, the program design parameters, and the matching fund guidelines. Then in November, the Summer Study Commission on pre-kindergarten will be due. January 2015 is a potential early launch of the pre-K pilot. Part of the statements of county readiness were for counties to let us know when they thought that they would be ready for that launch. July 2015 is the launch date, but we asked counties if they could up that and be ready in January. And then you can see July 2015, full launch. That's it for today.
Thank you, Ms. Brizzi.
Thank you very much.
Do we have questions?
I have a question.
David?
In your selection of the groups within the county, what criteria are you using? Is there a geographic criterion that you use? And maybe you can just talk about a few of those.
Sure. The statute requires that the 5 counties be geographically diverse, that they represent rural and non-rural counties, and that they have the capacity to meet the design needs of the longitudinal study. So those are a few of the key components. Some other things that we're looking at is the need for the eligible children within the statute are those families earning less than 127% of the federal poverty level. So we took a look at how many 4-year-olds estimated are at need within each county, the capacity of eligible programs to serve those children, making sure that that's sufficient to meet the need, as well as the percentage of children in poverty under the age of 5, overall poverty rates, and other factors that demonstrate community readiness, such as a past commitment to early education, the potential to have a cash match, because we do need that 10 to 50% before we can move forward. Those are all the components that we've been looking at.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe the last item is compensation models. You received a report 2 months ago from Risa Renee regarding the compensation model report. Are there any questions? Bob, you have questions?
No, I just am going to mention the compensation model.
Oh, okay.
Didn't you just say that that was next on the agenda?
I did. I said the board received their report 2 months ago and asked if there were any questions.
I just wanted to give a little update and express and ask for some understanding about the $30 million performance part of the compensation program that's upcoming. Because
that's not this, so I guess I'm
It's a-
confused as
it's-
to what's on the agenda.
is that not a part of the compensation model?
No,
Is that not a part of the compensation
No.
model?
no.
Then I'll talk about this next time.
Okay, are you talking about the school performance awards?
Yes.
Yeah, those haven't been distributed yet
Right.
in
but
any way?
But they are a part of that whole package of compensations.
No, they
No?
are stipends that can only be awarded to effective and highly effective teachers within school districts that meet certain criteria according to all test scores. They have no bearing in the compensation model.
Okay, then I misunderstood that.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, seeing nothing else to come before,
Sorry,
oh,
I'm sorry, late in the day. So we just wanted to point out to you that there was a memo that was provided in the last meeting, and I don't think there was a robust conversation, but in reviewing the waiver submission, did want to point out that was actually a memo provided to the board. I don't think anybody asked any questions about it, but there were 60 non-compliant LEAs. And last year, this was an item at the agenda. In fact, David Freitas, I think you asked for a report to come back and some guidance to be provided in advance, because that
Yes.
was the first year that that had gone into effect. And the board made a decision based on the department's recommendation not to take any action against the non-compliant LEAs, but they would work to develop more specific guidance to make sure that those LEAs going forward, as they start to bargain, which starts August 1st, could be ensuring that they complied with the statute for collective bargaining and the compensation model specifically. So I just wanted to point out to you in that report, again, it was in the waiver submission as well, that there were 60 that were found to be non-compliant by a vendor, and then the department did a subsequent review and was provided with some assurances that by those LEAs that they would become compliant, but there was not a whole lot of information about what exactly is that assurance and what is the process going to be to ensure they are compliant. So we wanted to ensure that the board had read that and could ask questions of the department regarding their plans to ensure compliance for those 60 LEAs.
So question, how are we going to ensure compliance?
I guess that's the question that wasn't proposed by any member of the board. So, Risa, Renee, please.
When we did our review of compensation
Can you
models for
can you
this
put
year-
down your microphone? There
sorry.
you go.
When we did our review of compensation models during the 13-14 school year, those were contracts that were submitted to ERB and to us after they were settled and ratified. And so they were already in effect. So we collected those from districts and from ERB and did an initial review, or had an initial review done. There were 60 compensation models that we had questions about. And so the compensation and evaluation specialist on my staff sent letters to all 60 of the districts indicating what concerns we had about their plans. And we did hear back from all 60 of those districts. We had conversations with either directly with the superintendent or with the HR director or their school district business manager or their school attorney. In some cases, we also heard from the head of their teachers association. But we did receive additional clarification from those districts so that we were able to determine that in spite of the fact that a number of those models are not drafted with great clarity. They are ambiguous, some of them lack some details, some of them don't repeat statutory provisions because they assume the statutory requirements that they're supposed to meet and rather than repeat those specifically in the language. So after receiving a lot of clarification from those districts, we were able to determine that all but 2 districts, as they implemented their plans met the statutory requirements. And so that is information that was in the report that we sent you 2 months ago indicated we still had 2 districts. We had 1 district at that time that we knew for a fact was not compliant. We had another district we were still waiting to hear from the superintendent on, and we did finally hear back from them. We have contacted those districts. We've told them what the issue is with the drafting. We have also been in consultation with ERB. We talk to ERB weekly at least about the advice that they are giving in terms of bargaining to districts who are starting to bargain on August the 1st, so that we are saying the same thing about much more clear drafting, explicit language, actually repeating the statutory requirements in their plan as a part of their plan rather than just assuming them. So we are in collaboration with ERB giving advice about much clearer drafting to districts as they start to bargain on August 1st.
David?
Just a follow-up question. So all school districts are now in compliance except for 2? Is that what you're saying?
Well, of the districts that submitted plans, and there were 207 that submitted plans for review to us. And so of those, there are only 2 of those 207 that are not in compliance.
What about all the districts that did not submit a plan to you? How do we
Well-
know they're in compliance?
There are still, this year, there are going to be 40 districts that are still operating on unexpired contracts that were
Okay.
in effect at the time that PL 90 went into effect. So they are not required to have a compliant compensation model until they next bargain their new contract. So that's why there's a difference between the number of plans that we actually reviewed and the total number of contracts that are out there, because some of them have not yet bargained a new contract under the new law.
Right, that makes absolute sense. Is there a system within the department that's going to continually monitor compliance and then get back to us if
Well-
there are some issues, or how does that all work?
You know, the statute that gives us responsibility to review comp models and to report to you doesn't have any enforcement language in it. It requires us to review plans, but it's plans that have already been submitted that are already a part of contracts that are already in place. So, you know, there really isn't a process for being proactive except for giving guidance about good drafting, better drafting, and what needs to be included in a compliant comp model. But, you know, we're not involved in bargaining. We don't look at drafts along the way. That's just not part of the process. So we don't actually see comp models to review until after the contracts have already been settled and ratified.
But if you're asking if we have to do this on an
So,
annual
You
basis,
know, we
that
do-
is true.
We are required to do it on an annual basis, and we are required to report to you on an annual basis. The statute says that you are responsible for ensuring compliance, but there's no real enforcement language in the statute, so I'm not really sure. I don't know what I would recommend to you in terms of enforcing compliance or ensuring compliance, because all of the review that we do is after the fact.
Sarah?
Are you aware of the last calendar year for the contracts that preclude this requirement? I'm just curious at what point does that last contract expire?
I believe that the last contract expires in either, oh gosh, I just looked this up.
I can speak to that. Sorry, I'm Herbst General Counsel, Sarah.
Oh, all right.
June 30th, 2019 is
Thank
the
you.
very last contract.
Right.
So this coming bargaining season, this coming bargaining season, there'll be about 28 schools that are going to be bargaining new under this one, and then Reese is absolutely right after that. There are about 40.
Okay.
Why are those numbers not exact numbers? Because some schools have opened their contracts, older contracts,
do it.
and put in place new compensation models. So some of them have new compensation models, but those are schools that generally have not opened their entire contracts. We also have schools that have calendar year contracts, so a lot of times they'll carry that over to the next fiscal year since they're bargaining. But that's what you're going to see is there is a lone school, and I will not name names, but June 30th of 2019 is when they'll all move over. Almost all of them after 2016. Well, very, very few after that.
So after that point, across the state, everyone should be in compliance.
Everybody should be in compliance at that point, and hopefully by 2019, they will have had the guidance that DOE has put out, and they should be able to check the box for compliance throughout. What you'll see between those two reports was there's all of these different things for compliance, and then the second report looks at here are the 3 big statutory items there. So we're hoping, and we keep in contact with the schools about all of that compliance. When ERB has impasse cases, we also provide guidance on the compensation model, so there have been some of those cases that have come out in the past year as well about that.
And
So-
those that are coming on board with new contract language have the benefit of people who've already done contract language. So,
That's right, and I think DOE in the report, as you've seen, some of the transition schools,
Correct.
there's also a year kind of to transition some of that language where your evaluation since your evaluation really informs who's going to be eligible for the compensation model, you've seen that transition as well. So here shortly in the next year or two, hopefully those reports are going to be a lot cleaner as far as what the schools are doing.
Dave,
I-
sorry.
as far as what they've agreed to.
I appreciate your proactive stance on this. My reason for raising it a year ago was not to catch anyone in this web of intrigue, but to be proactive and to be sure schools understand, and I think you've done a great job in being proactive with it, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much.
Sure, I was asked to mention too, for the coming year, so the compensation model, as Risa mentioned, pursuant to the statute 2029-6, that's how teachers get their increases, right, is going through the compensation model.
Right.
So the money that's going to teacher increases is going through that. Next year, in addition to other monies that might go through that compensation model, there is a $30 million performance grant. And I was just talking to Risa, we're working with DOE on Monday to talk about the distribution of that money. But ERB's stance, of course, has been that money going to teachers should be bargained through that compensation model. So the compensation model language, and we already have some 13-15 contracts with that in there, has language in there about that school performance grant or annual performance grant. It doesn't have a real title in the statute, but wanted to mention that as well for the coming year for your compensation models.
Thank you. Seeing no other items on the agenda, I move a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. All right. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Tony, Brad, whoever's on board.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Has left the conference.